listening to Transformation in Trials. Welcome to Transformation in Trials. This is a podcast exploring all things transformational in clinical trials. Nothing is off limits on the show, and we will have guests from the whole spectrum of the clinical trials community. And we're your hosts, Ivana and Sam.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Transformation in Trials podcast. I'm delighted to be joined by Kimberly Tableman, who is the founder of a really exciting technology company called ESPERO Health. Hi, Kimberly. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Sam. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. So as with each episode of the Transformation in Trials podcast, we try and base things around a theme. And based on Kimberly's background, today's theme is, does true transformation in clinical trials start with the protocol? So let's get us started. Kimberly, we have a broad audience that listen to the Transformation in Trials podcast. And perhaps you could just kick us off with describing what is a protocol and why it's important.
So I describe the protocol as the Holy Bible or the Holy Grail of the clinical trials. So the protocol contains all of the instructions for how to conduct the clinical trial, as well as the overall hypothesis. So from a scientific hypothesis perspective, it is what is the specific drug or therapy or medical device or digital therapeutic that we're testing, and what is the expected outcome in the patient relative to that therapy. So all of that has to be defined. The mechanism of action, the actual patient population, the number of people that need to, for lack of a better word, try the therapy, so that we can determine if the therapy, the drug, the medical device, the digital therapeutic is safe. That's our number one priority with phase 1 clinical trials. And then as you move through phase 2A, 2B, phase 3 trials, we're looking for overall efficacy. So if you're treating, for example, depression with a digital therapeutic, so let's say an app now is some of the new frontier that we're pushing into, that you can actually demonstrate that there is efficacy between, having some sort of impact on depression, improving quality of life, improving symptoms. And all of that would be dictated in the protocol that says, this is how we're going to look at this. This is how we're going to test it. And it also lays out, this is how we're going to collect the data. And it's also going to tell us whether or how we know that we've been successful in that endeavor. So everything really related to clinical trials begins with the protocol.
Wow. Thanks for that explanation, Kimberly. And a lot of our guests talk about the complexity of trials. It has increased massively in recent years. And we hear terms like basket trials, umbrella trials, adaptive protocol design. How is that kind of reflected in protocol considerations? Could you share a little bit of background about that?
Yeah, so there's actually a lot of movement that's changing how we develop the protocol itself. So historically, the protocol starts with a lot of manual research. Even today, that is true. Where people are Googling, I say phoning a friend, doing literature searches to try to get as much information as they can about the specific disease state that they're looking at and that we are looking to conduct a clinical trial for. Then we have, again, historically written the protocol in a way that I kind of call it a digitized form, even, as far as the data collection itself. There is a lot of benefit to moving to some, more of an electronic type version. And that really plays into some of the pieces, Sam, that you're asking about when you talk about umbrella, basket, adaptive, which says that as you're running the clinical trial, you're going to gain additional information throughout the execution of that trial. And you're probably going to need to adapt or make some changes to that clinical trial. The other piece that's becoming very, commonplace is around real world data. So the clinical care setting data. So the patient is going and having, normal interactions with healthcare providers from a clinical care setting perspective. And then they go to their investigator from a clinical trial. They're executing against a clinical trial, or perhaps they're going to urgent care. And again, you wouldn't necessarily know that because they're not going to the investigator themselves. But again, the hypothesis is that all that information, all that data is relevant to the study itself. And so how do we take that information back in and in the adaptive, in particular, trial process, then adapt the trial? I would argue that having the protocol in an electronic format, versus a Word document, but that you actually have it stored in a system, in a platform, makes it easier to make those changes to the protocol. Again, building in some of that overarching flexibility. One of the biggest problems we see with protocols right now is that they are in Word documents. People are like, what version am I on and who has what version, right? It's all over the place. I mean, and even if you have them stored in a SharePoint site, what we've seen is people going to the SharePoint site, they'll actually copy and paste from the wrong version of the protocol. Like and then copy and paste it over here to another business process. It's wrong, right? It's erroneous. It's not correct. So there's definitely an opportunity in this business process, from a macro perspective, to improve the overall execution of writing the protocol, and then how that impacts your ability to execute the trial more successfully as well.
Understood. So if I'm right in thinking, a lot of this is still done in pretty manual process, like Microsoft Word.
Yeah, that's very true.
Okay.
And it's also a process that is highly collaborative.
Yeah.
Inside of a pharma company. So you've got your clinical, scientists that are generating the initial hypothesis and really working through kind of the endpoints, right? Then you have the medical writers that are responsible for almost conducting, I call it conducting the symphony, where they, are pulling all the different pieces of the protocol in. And then you have just players that need to provide input. So stats, what's your statistically significant, patient sample size? You've got your clinical trial budget group. What's the budget for the overall clinical trial? You've got legal, you've got regulatory. So the list is kind of, I don't want to say endless. We like to say, there's about 10 or 12 groups of people internally that are involved. But imagine trying to manage all of that via email. Yeah. So I need to get input from all these different players, all these different groups. And my mechanism to get that input is via email, or I might be using a collaborative, SharePoint type site. But again, I'm still running into issues where people are overwriting other people's comments, or comments get lost, or what version am I on? So they're just, the reality is there's technology available that allows this process to be much more streamlined, allows the data to be accessible to everyone at the same time, but it's very clear, what version of the document that you're on. So that's really, when we talk about ESPERO, that's really what we're trying to do as we think about transforming clinical trials.
Brilliant. And it sounds like a real problem then. What's the impact of getting something wrong related to the protocol? Obviously, it sounds like this is a massively inefficient process, first and foremost. So there's maybe a time cost to getting things wrong. But are there other factors that are impacted by this pretty manual process by the sound of it?
Well, it's interesting because if you talk to anyone, in clinical development, the three big topics are time, cost, and quality, right? And I would say all three of those are impacted by this process. So if you're trying to coordinate 10 to 12 people or 10 to 12 groups internally, and that's taking you, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 24 weeks, right? And you can accelerate that even by, I'm arguing 30%. You probably can accelerate it even by 50% by using kind of a platform play. But right there, right from the very beginning of our, starting a clinical trial, we are already accelerating what we call cycle times, right? Mm-hmm. We're already accelerating right out of the gate by using a more structured type platform to manage this process. And then if you move from that to cost, I mean, cost is significant. And I'll say it this way, there's so many factors impacting cost, but one is we've historically as an industry struggled with patient recruitment. So one of the things that ESPERO does from an insights perspective, it brings in data right out of the gate as the protocol is being written about where the patients are. And that is extraordinarily important information because historically the protocol has just been written by, I mentioned before, phone a friend, but it's like based on institutional knowledge, calling people and trying to figure out, oh, what sites did we use before? Should we use those ones again? And it's kind of like it was a needle in a haystack kind of a game. And then hoping that those investigators were going to go ahead and recruit the patients. There's this opportunity to totally flip that paradigm now, because now we know where the patients are. I mean, I can tell you right now, right? We can search we can use historical data from clinicaltrials.gov, but we can also use the Google Trends kind of API, and we can heat map where are people searching on, lung cancer or pancreatic cancer, and there are, there's epidemiology and heat maps that show you where that's happening, right out of the gate. So there you've got an opportunity to improve patient recruitment, which historically, again, it adds a lot of time and a lot of cost, to a clinical trial. The two other things I'll mention just quickly is protocol amendments. If a protocol is not well written, if anything gets kind of, for lack of a better technical term, screwed up through this process of trying to work with all these different people and get this document pulled together, that can cause significant issues around protocol amendments, right? So then, and there's protocol amendments for a lot of reasons. So, I mean, certainly there are real protocol amendments around, hey, the blood pressure cuff at this site's not working. I mean, we know that to be true, but we also know there's protocol amendments because the protocol is just, it's wrong and it needs to be fixed. And then the third thing I'll mention is just compliance. So we know that with the FDA, 23% of issues are around documentation, just documentation errors. I mean, it's that simple. And there are findings associated with that, and there are costs associated with that. So, if you look at, does transforming, clinical trials start with the protocol? I will argue yes, because with those three, factors that we just mentioned, right again out of the gate, you can start to have an impact on time, cost, and quality as it relates to running a clinical trial.
Awesome. And normally I don't like to dive into the solution so early in the episode, but based on what you told me, I'm dying to learn a bit more about what you guys have been working on. So we've covered what a protocol is, we've covered what current state looks like and some of the problems associated to it and some of the missed opportunities by having current state. Tell us a bit about what you guys are doing at ESPERO Health and how you're trying to help solve some of these challenges.
Yeah, so there's three things that I'll mention, and I also just want to say that some of the guiding principles for ESPERO is keeping it simple and straightforward, because for our industry, moving out of some of these manual processes, you want to make it easy to start with, and you don't want to make it overly complicated, because then the transition and adoption is very difficult. So that's one of our fundamental principles. The second is scalable, that any product or tech product that we're bringing into pharma, I would just argue, from my background as the head of digital clinical trials at GSK, that was the biggest issue that startups faced was, bringing something to market that actually could scale with a company the size of Pfizer, the size of GSK, the size of Novartis. So that's another one of my guiding and founding principles for ESPERO was this product has to be, scalable right out of the gate. And so we have built it that way. The three major components speak directly into the problems that we just talked about, Sam, which is insights upfront, right? And again, I'm taking a very straightforward approach with clinicaltrials.gov data aggregated. You can see, you can do, I should say, a comparative type analysis. So you can choose protocols that are from your competitors, or you can choose your own protocols just to get an idea of what's going on from a site burden, patient burden, protocol complexity perspective. You can also analyze the inclusion, exclusion criteria that have been used previously for that specific disease state. So we bring all of that into one platform. And then the secondary concept from an efficiency perspective we talked about is just, that the data is collected electronically, within the platform. It follows the common protocol template that you would expect from Transcelerate, as well as the ICH M11 guidelines, which are the most recent guidelines put forth by the FDA to electronically exchange protocol information, which, by the way, is a huge leap forward for mankind. So we're very excited about that. And because historically, by the way, the FDA has required a PDF. So, again, in a way, the FDA is pushing us forward as an industry as well, saying, look, we should just be electronically exchanging this information, which makes a whole lot of sense to me in 2023, given that we're all ordering, our groceries online and our food and our dry cleaning and anything you could possibly want from Amazon. It seems like we should be able to exchange data electronically with regulatory authorities.
Right.
So we're moving that forward, which is very exciting. And then, I think ESPERO is at the forefront of that. So, I don't know any of my competitors that are yet aligned to ICH M11. So that was something that we built right out of the gate. Those guidelines actually have just been released. And then the last piece is the workflow. And I think this business process, there's so many business processes in clinical development that lend themselves to workflow. But this one in particular, to me, is an absolute no-brainer, right? You've just got so many different folks that need to be able to collaborate. And why not facilitate that in the easiest possible, way? So that would be the big, the third big pillar of the ESPERO platform.
Sounds pretty awesome to me. And can you talk to us a little bit about the kind of technology? Is this the software as a service type solution? And how do you mine the data from clinicaltrials.gov? Is that a manual process, or have you got some funky automation going on in the back end?
Yeah. So, clinicaltrials.gov, fortunately, all of us have access, from an API perspective to pull that data in and do analysis on it. So it's really useful, from that perspective. For us, we are enterprise software as a service. And the nice thing about software as a service is that, if you decide to buy, you get your, a username and password and you're done, you're ready to go. You're ready to write your first protocol. So there isn't this huge heavy lift. I've been doing this for a really long time. So there used to be, back in the day, what we called COTS, your commercial off the shelf products, then there was build. There was this oscillation between going with a commercial off the shelf product versus building internally yourself. And, in both cases, there were different, there were obviously different challenges that you faced. With enterprise software as a service, you can literally, again, as I mentioned, have a username and password and get started straight away. And you don't have this heavy lift and heavy cost as far as implementation within your infrastructure. So, I've done those kinds of implementations. They tend to be very costly. They tend to take a large amount of resource, to implement them. ESPERO is not that way. It's not designed to work that way. And with the advent of, kind of what I would say, improved technology and APIs and things of that nature, we can do this with a high degree of fidelity and security as well. And it just makes life easier, really, for everyone.
Sounds pretty cool to me. Now, you can kind of guide me here if I get this wrong, but if you're setting up the protocol quicker, you're kind of creating something that's more kind of scalable and is electronic rather than based on a Word document. What impact does that have to other kind of downstream systems? Because in my mind's eye, like everything's driven from the protocol, and there's good opportunities possibly to maybe automate a bit more downstream too.
Precisely. And that's exactly, where and why I started with the protocol, because that was my hypothesis as well, that if we got this part right, that we could then impact and continue the transformation downstream. So there's two things I would highlight. One is that we can take a sponsor's templates and actually, so when I say templates, I'm talking about templates for like a clinical study report, investigator brochure, a statistical analysis plan, and we can automate populating that template with data from the protocol, because that's a very straightforward, from a tech perspective, that's not hard, for us to do. So any company that works with us, with ESPERO, we take your templates, you say, here's the templates we want you to use, here's the pieces of the protocol that we want pre-populated. Of course, you still have a human being that goes in and adds in any additional, pieces of information that need to be added to that specific deliverable. If it's the clinical study report, if it's the investigator brochure, if it's the statistical analysis plan, or any other document, that you need to create, and you need to pull data specifically from the protocol. So I think that's pretty exciting. I think it provides efficiency, and right now, again, that truly how this happens today is people go in. So people from other groups have to go in, find the right version of the protocol, make sure they found the right version, and they're copy and pasting. That's how the process works today. So again, this opportunity to automate and accelerate and have a pre-populated template, and then have those same individuals take a look at it and see what else needs to be added. The other piece that I'm even more excited about than that is the connection of what we call the schedule of activities, right? So the schedule of activities is like the heart and soul of a clinical trial. It says, these are the number of visits that you have to do as a patient, and these are the procedures that each visit contain. And again, these visits and procedures are what allow us to capture patient data, which gives us the information about whether this drug or this therapy is safe and effective. So that schedule of activities is used a lot downstream and throughout the entirety of the clinical development process. And so we will be integrating with, at least out of the gate, with Viva and metadata from a case report form creation perspective. So again, the vision or the idea is that we could automate the creation of case report forms instead of it's a very manual effort right now. So people have to take a hard copy document or pull up the electronic Word document and type in and create, kind of the case report form libraries, and then the actual case report forms themselves. So I envision a world where that becomes much more automated in the future.
That's huge, because that's like another one of the big kind of cycle time metrics that people look for, right? Is the database go live date from point of final protocol to database go live. And if I've got it correct, if it sounds like what you're talking to here would speed that up and remove sort of too much manual intervention, then that could have a huge impact. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's really, I tell the story, Sam, sometimes about when I worked at GSK, Karen Ann Terrell, who was the chief digital officer at the time, she and I were working together, and she said, what do you really want to do? And I said, I want to transform drug development. And I just fundamentally believe that we can do it. And some of these pieces that we're talking about today, Sam, is that's the foundation for transforming drug development. And I also used to say that we could take drug development from 7 to 10 years to 3 to 5. I still believe that. I mean, we actually have proven it as an industry with COVID, number one. that we can do it. And number two, all we're talking about here is removing all the administrative overhead, right? You're still going to need enough time, I would argue, to measure biological response, right? I mean, you've got to see over a period of time that you're not having and in fact, we're still studying the impact of the COVID vaccine, right? I mean, there's going to be, long hauler studies, and there's going to be longitudinal studies that tell us, what that long-term impact of the COVID vaccine is. But I've been doing this for a long time, as I mentioned before, and I spent, nearly 10 years at Pfizer and almost 3 at GSK. And it was just super clear to me that a lot of the drivers of the amount of time it takes to bring a drug to market were administrative, burden and overhead and inefficiency. And I kept thinking, if we can just pull this inefficiency out and get to the core of what it is that we're trying to do, then that really allows us to focus on the patient. And that really allows us to focus on innovation in the drugs and therapies that we're bringing to market. So that's my mission. I mean, I think at this point, that's my life's work is to see that transformed.
Very good. I've got this funny feeling you're not just going to stop at the protocol either. I've got it. I can see it in your eyes.
There's a bigger plan, Sam.
Yeah, totally. But that's quite a nice segue, actually, to maybe just provide a bit more about you, your background. You kind of alluded to working big pharma, but maybe take us back into how you got into this space, both pharma and then into the tech space, and provide a few anecdotes and stories along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an interesting story. I still remember being in my undergraduate program. And at the time, I thought that I was going to go into physical therapy because I was really into physical fitness and wellness. And by the way, I still am, 30 years later or whatever it is, 25 years later. But I decided, this is very serendipitous. I decided at the time that I didn't want to be in school for another 4 years. I was very anxious to get out into the world and conquer the world, so to speak. And so I looked around and I said, okay, I don't want to be in school for another 4 years right now. I had already completed 2. What can I do? I want to get my undergraduate degree and kind of get out into the workplace. And it was very clear to me at the time that technology was going to be everywhere, and that it didn't matter, what I did for a career, that I was always going to need to know and understand technology. So I felt like that was a pretty safe bet back in, gosh, it was a long time ago, 2000, 90, 97, 98, 99, that time frame. So I made that decision, and that was a pivotal decision in my life to do my undergraduate degree in management information systems. And, little did I even know at the time that I was going into a field that frankly was still very male dominated. Right. So I was, but that didn't even occur to me. I just thought, hey, this is going to be important, for the future, and I want to be a part of it. So I did that. And then the next big decision I made was doing management consulting in the early part of my career. And I really say that I got my real education in management consulting because I had the opportunity to see a wide variety of companies. They did things differently, how they did things from a tech perspective. I went through a lot of large scale implementations myself. And all of those experiences laid a foundation, right, of my knowledge and my experience about what works and what doesn't work for big companies. And then as I moved forward, I decided again to make a big decision to move into pharma. Again, that was about 15 years ago. And, I was just passionate about bringing therapies to patients. I know all of us that are in this industry, we do what we do because we fundamentally believe that we are bringing necessary therapies to market that can change people's lives and extend their lives in the case of oncology, you've got, improving quality of life, and that people have an opportunity to celebrate birthdays and anniversaries and things that frankly they wouldn't without those therapies. So it really resonated, from that perspective as well. And then I had the opportunity, as I was in that space, to just solve problems, with technology. And so my mind is just wired that way, that everything I see, I think, how can we apply a technology-based solution to this, and how that would make that specific process more efficient. And so it's really been the culmination of all these years in pharma, and kind of parachuting into different projects and different parts of the process end to end, that enhanced my overall understanding of the entirety of the opportunity that we really do have to do this better, to do it more efficiently, and again, to get those therapies to patients that need them sooner.
Amazing. And what do you think's stopping pharma from moving quicker? Because I meet a lot of passionate people like yourself. You're up there with being one of the most passionate, if not the, of course. But I meet all of these passionate people, but then the pace of change just doesn't seem to be in line with that kind of passion that I see. What do you think's holding us back?
Yeah, there's a couple of things, but most of them are cultural. And, the first is that when you have an industry that has had the advantage for many years of being, I call it a cash cow industry, right? So keep in mind, I grew up at Pfizer, and they were doing just fine, and they still are. And so the problem with that is, if you have the money, you kind of spend it. And yeah, you believe in innovation, and yeah, you believe in efficiency, and yeah, you talk about cost cutting, but if you don't really have to do it, right? So it's kind of like, think about even us as people, or, individuals, if I don't need to think about money and I go to the grocery store, I just kind of throw all the stuff in the grocery cart. I'm not thinking about it, right? Because I'm like, I have the money, I can pay for that. If I don't have money, right, economically, well, I'm paying attention to how much money I'm spending. Can I afford that? Is it on sale? Do I have a coupon? So money really does drive some different behavior. And so what I do see as this transition in the industry is that as we move away from this idea of blockbuster drugs, okay, which really dominated, the early 2000s, if you will, and we move to, more personalized medicine, which is much more targeted, and you're talking about smaller patient populations, et cetera. When you look at the fact that we were able to develop a vaccine as quickly, so we brought that to market in 9 months. And when I say we, Pfizer, Moderna, J&J, but now they know they can do it.
Yeah.
So now they can't sit and go, oh, we can't do it. Yeah. Well, yeah, we just did. So I think that is also changing the conversation. And then the third piece, from a workforce perspective, you have people that have been in these companies for a very long time, which is wonderful. And you've got things like what I call the Pfizer family. We've known each other for 100 years. We've spent 100 years together. The issue is there isn't a huge motivator to change. So you've got to find internally and empower those change agents that say, look, I know this isn't easy. I know it's not fun to change sometimes. I know, it feels different, but we can do it. Right. And then have those internal champions that say, so it's really a layered approach from my perspective. It's the macro environment. It's senior leadership taking a stand and saying, look, we are going to do this. And then it's having those internal champions that help move the entirety of the workforce forward and provide them with the support they need as they go through a change.
Thanks for that response. And I'm also curious. So you're in big pharma for a number of years, and now you've come out, set up your own company. founder of ESPERO Health. What's that like, being a founder? And if you don't mind me asking, is there any kind of considerations about being a female founder to your point, in a very male-dominated tech ecosystem?
So Sam, I'll say being a founder, period, is hard. So I'll start with that, because I'm sure that the challenges that I face, some of them certainly are not gender specific. I think the hardest part, for me right now, from a female gender perspective, is that 3% of women-owned companies are funded. Just 3%. So it's a very small number. So while we're starting to see equity in leadership teams, so think about, we've gone, from 0 to 38% on most senior leadership teams within pharma. Of course, we'd love to see that get to 50%, but, these companies are making progress against that target. We do see, continued programs aimed at bringing that female kind of that equity, to the higher levels, the higher ranks in these companies. So that's a very positive trend. When it comes to fundraising and VC, that's a whole other ballgame that I am very much involved in at the moment. And it is challenging. And there is a historical way or method in which companies have been funded. And it really does have to do with, I went to grad school with Bob and my name is Bill. And so, so there's something very helpful in this network of and Bob, heads up the VC fund at JP Morgan, or, and knows Bill, and they have this history, and that is truly how it worked back in the day. Now that's changing, but the hardest part is access, right? Is getting that access. If you are not a white male, and that means there's a whole spectrum of people, outside of people that even look like me, right? So you have female founders and LGBTQ, founders, and you have disabled veterans, and you have African Americans and Latinos, and I mean, there's a lot of underrepresentation, I would argue, as you look at fundraising and money and venture capital. And the reality is, this is the part that's really interesting. I could have decided to go start a bunch of different companies. And by the way, I've thought about it at different times in my life. In fact, at one point I was looking at starting a shoe company, whole different story for a different day. But let me say this. When you are pushing into enterprise tech in pharma, you have to have money. You have to have funding. There's not a scenario where I am going to do this and be successful without funding. And the reason for that is that innovation and innovations in our space, the sales cycle within pharma tends to be 18 to 24 months. So there is not a scenario where you have a store and you're selling a widget and you can start getting cash flow tomorrow, right? Or you set up a digital marketplace and you start selling your wares and you are generating revenue. In my case, I will build this product and I will have revenue start flowing in 18 to 24 months, right? That's just how that's how it works in our industry. So in those cases, funding is very, very important. And I would argue it's extraordinarily important for diverse candidates, that are leaders, demonstrating new ideas, but they need other people to come alongside and help make that vision a reality.
Got it. And whereabouts are ESPERO in your journey, Kimberly? Are you at sort of point where you have customers, or is it too soon for that?
Yes. So we do have our early adopter program, which we're allowing 3 this year. So 3 early adopters. We have 1 slot that's filled and 2 I'm very active with this month. So I'm excited about that. I'm absolutely happy, obviously, to talk to anyone that's interested in the product, because very quickly on the heels of our early adopter program in 2023. We'll be continuing to add customers as we move into 2024. So yes, from a customer and industry perspective, I will say that we've seen a very quick uptake of the concepts that ESPERO has put forth and the product and the platform itself. Again, very intentionally meant to be simple and to just make sense and to make life easier for the people that need to pull these protocols together. So from that perspective, we're in good shape. From a fundraising perspective, I am still in a seed round. So we will look to push into a Series A at the end of 2024, but right now we're still at seed. And I have a very robust financial model. I need about $2 million from a raise perspective. And we have about 600 of that right now. So we're still looking for 1.4 million. And that is my, I don't want to say it's my full-time job right now, but pretty close.
Well, plenty of investors we have as listeners. So feel free to dive in, please, investors, should you like to be here. From my vantage point, I think ultimately success comes down to lots of things, but often it's driven by the passion of the founder. And that's certainly come across today. You don't need me to tell you that. And I also think like the problem it is solving as well. It's so huge. And as we talked about, everything starts with the protocol. So for me, I'm 100% sure that you are going to succeed and that ESPERO Health is going to go on to bigger and better things. I'm slightly nervous about what you're going to get into downstream, actually, just based on the areas I work in. But that's a conversation for another day along with the shoes.
Exactly. Then I'll be coming for you, Sam. No,
exactly. It's a big ecosystem. I'm sure we can all survive. But as we kind of wrap up the podcast, there's always a question that we ask our listeners as a final question. And that is, if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about the industry, what would that be?
I definitely think our ability to move quickly and take on innovation, and just even the idea of, fail forward, take a risk, try something. And the worst thing that happens is it doesn't work out, but that's the only way we can keep moving the industry forward. So if we take a very protective stance of not trying anything new, well, certainly we can't move the industry forward, at that rate. So I just think we all have to kind of embrace change, and the result will be positive for, I say, people. It's not even just patients, but all of us who at one particular time or another in our lives may need a therapy that our companies are developing today.
Amen to that. Well, that final answer. And if people want to reach you, Kimberly, and find out more about yourself and ESPERO Health, where's the best place for them to get in touch?
Yes. So we do have a website, which is www.espero-health.com. Certainly anyone's welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn. And then my email is kt@espero-health.com as well.
Awesome. Kimberly, this has been an excellent episode. Really appreciate you coming on the show, and really looking forward to hearing much more as you continue on your journey. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Sam, and thanks again for having me.
You're listening to Transformation in Trials. If you have a suggestion for a guest for our show, reach out to Sam Parnell or Ivana Rosendal on LinkedIn. You can find more episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or in any other player. Remember to subscribe and get the episodes hot off the editor.